Hey everybody, welcome to our first attempt at doing a video cast of answering your questions. We're in this series Transform, and what we realized was it's such a deep, complex topic that we cannot cover everything in 35 minutes on a Sunday morning. There's going to be questions. I'm going to forget stuff, maybe not cover what you're wrestling with. And so we're doing this. It's a kind of a short form video series that we're going to be doing during the series only. And so today we're going to be answering some questions and then walking through a few other things that didn't quite make it. And so if you answer questions, I want to let you know, we're going to answer those at the end of this video content. If you want to, you can skip towards the end and skip what we're talking about. But before we get to that, I want to introduce you to Seth. Most of you don't know Seth. Seth is our production director. He is behind the scenes. He does an incredible job. If you ever watch our YouTube, our Facebook, our live feeds and love them, he is responsible. If the audio ever goes out, he is responsible. So wherever you feel about Seth, man, hey, welcome. Thank you so much for helping me today.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. These forums are going to be great. I know a lot of times I have questions. I know a lot of times you and I talk during the week. There's material that you don't get to. So if you guys do have questions, just a reminder, you can go to our website, click on the Transform link, and there's a place for you to submit your questions. It's completely anonymous. Do that through the week, and we're going to do our best to get to those on these weekly podcasts. But like I said, you a lot of times have material. We talk a lot through the week, and just either it may not make the cut. It goes a little deeper than where we have time for. So you were telling me this week that there was some things that that you had and you wanted to talk about. Yeah. So give me a little bit about it. Give them the inside scoop.
It was actually my favorite thing, and I did want to talk about it, but it didn't answer the question. And so that's happened so often where I've got a topic and I study and I prep for it. And so, the kind of cutting room floor topic that I want to hit, that you missed it this past Sunday, check it out online. We talked about God's universal will and the boundaries that creates for our lives, that God's never, and I can't stress this enough, God will never ask you to do something outside of his commands and his character. Those two things, if you can keep those as guardrails, what we said this past Sunday was you can't wreck your life. If you stay within those two things, man, you're gonna be okay. What I ended up talking about was how do you do that? What's that look like? What I wanted to talk about was what I called the big three. And it is when I think about the big three that kind of get us in trouble in life that God has commands and guardrails around. It's these three, and I want to give them to you really quickly because I think as I was studying and prepping, I think every single one of us, maybe not at the same time, but at different seasons of our life, every single one of us, we're going to struggle with all three of these issues. And so if you can kind of get God's call in your life around these three, and you can get why these are big ones, because there's hundreds of commands, there's hundreds of things that we're called to do. I mean, really, it's so kind of crazy. But if you can get these three, I really think it's going to be a big deal. And so I wrote them down. Number one is this. It's the one everybody talks about. It's the one that when I mention this word in the auditorium, everybody pays attention all of a sudden. All I've got to do is talk about sex, and everybody's ears are on me. Matter of fact, one Sunday, I just want to walk up there on stage and be like, sex, and just watch everybody engage. Yeah, just every teenager's going to be like, whoa, what are we talking about? But sexual sin is a huge thing that God talks about a lot. In fact, you read through the text, every story almost, it seems like there's some level of sexual sin. So from Genesis through Revelation, it's a constant theme that either it's in the story or it's a command or it's God's revealing his character through it. And I think the reason it's such a big deal is because sexual sin shapes your soul. It does something different. In 1 Corinthians 6:18, it says, flee from sexual immorality, which is, just so we're clear, that is everything between hi, how you doing, and let's get it on. Because there's a lot in between those two statements right there. It's everything. Teenagers always ask me, where's the line? It's like, well, Paul says treat women like a sister. So whatever you wouldn't do or you wouldn't do with your sister, that's what you shouldn't do with somebody who's not your wife, which some of you are like, that's gross. That's the point. But he says, flee from sexual morality, for all other sin is outside of your body, but he or she who sins sexually sins against themselves. And that themselves thing, I think he's talking about our souls. And sexual sin is so pervasive in our culture right now. with pornography and sleeping with your boyfriend and girlfriend, and just our thought lives and so many different things. And I'm not sure we take it as serious.
Well,
as we
TV
should.
commercials and
Absolutely.
ads and stuff all over the place, video games, just all sorts of things.
It's
everywhere.
about impossible to get away from. I mean, no, that's a great point. That it's everywhere. You can be driving down the street and there's billboard ads. You're right. And so, or you can be surfing the internet and you're on the most clean website in the world and there's an advertisement. It's crazy, and it really is everywhere. And yet, I think if we can get this one right, man, it saves us so much heartache. And I think it's so pervasive, which is why God has so many scriptures around it, saying, no, this is a big deal. This is not, again, I'll hear every now and then from somebody, they'll say, Nick, if you have two people, they really do love each other and they're committed to each other and they're going to get married, what's the big deal? I was kind of laugh and go, well, I'm the wrong person to ask. I don't know what the big deal is. Like, I'm not God, but for God looked at that and said, it's a big deal. And I think that's a big issue. And so when we think through what are the ones we need to pay attention to, I think sex is a huge one. And I would just say, if you're somebody who's listening to this right now and you struggle with any sexual sin, find somebody, talk with them, confess that. It says in James, there's healing through confession. And we need to take it seriously. I don't think enough people take it seriously because it hasn't hit them hard yet. They're thinking, oh, no one knows. I'm never going to do anything about that, Nick. I'm never going to cheat on my spouse. And that's literally every story before they sit in my office right here and talk about how it did hit them. So if you're struggling with that, really, please find somebody, have a conversation, and then get any help that you need to with that. So that's the first one. Second one is this, it's money. And man, I know if you're listening to this, you're like, man, church talks about money all the time. Yeah, you just clench up. It's like, okay, you can unclench. We don't have a donate button on the video. Okay, we're good. But it's crazy because, again, when you look at scriptures, much like sex, God tends to mess with people's financial situation to get their spiritual attention. And that is in the Old Testament through the New Testament. In fact, in all of the Old Testament stories, when God was trying to get their attention, he messed with their finances. He messed with the crops, which was their livelihood. I mean, and so because it's such a big issue, and while sexual sin shapes your soul, I think financial sin, when we don't honor God with our finances and do that, what happens is it shapes our trust. And Jesus speaks to this so clearly in the New Testament. He says it this way. He says, the biggest threat for your heart and my heart, all of us, none of us are immune to this. This was a universal kind of a thing, is not Satan. It's not an addiction. It's money. And that is at the core, that is the biggest thing for all of our hearts. Because while, yeah, it can buy us stuff. Maybe you're listening to this and going, Nick, I don't care about money. I don't care about stuff. I don't care if I go on vacations. I don't need a new car. I don't care about money. It's not about what money can provide you kind of physically with stuff, although some people struggle with that. It's what money provides you spiritually in the form of trust. When we have finances in our bank, when we do that, we lean into that. And what Jesus says is you're either going to lean into God and trust him, or you're going to lean into finances, which is why so many people, when it talks about giving, they're like, I can't afford to give. You don't understand my finances. And what they're saying is, I can't trust God to follow his commands, his kind of guardrails and guidelines for my life financially. And so I'm gonna lean into my money. I need this. And it messes it up. It messes up our spiritual walk with God. And really what we're communicating to God is, I don't trust you. And we've talked about that before. Man, money's a hard one, right? I mean, you've had some great stories with money, and so have I. And when we do it, man, it works out great. But it's a really hard, it's a hard thing to trust initially. Once you kind of get over that wall, and you're the other side, you're like, oh my goodness, this is so much better. But you can't see it until you get there. So you got any comments on that one?
It's the hardest one for me, which is why I'm quiet.
Yeah. I try to team up there and get him to say something, and it's like, no. I think it is. Well, it's for everybody. It really is.
But we hear so many good stories around when people, are faithful with their money, and so absolutely a big one. Yeah, and it's why we do the year-end offering. I mean, I said that Sunday. It's why we do this. It's
It's an easy step for people to step into financial giving in a way that's not based on guilt or coercion or pressure. I can't stand any of that stuff. I've been to some of those churches. We do not do that. What we want to do is invite people into a deeper relationship with God through them trusting God with their finances. And again, we have story after story after story of, man, I did it, Nick. I was worried. I was scared. Of course you were scared. It's a trust issue, but man, God showed up. Let me tell you what happened. And it's awesome. So those are two big ones. The last one is, man, I think it's probably one that you're not expecting. The first two are pretty common, money and sex. I mean, that's an easy one. The last one, though, it's the one I think is so pervasive, and yet underneath, it's like it actually impacts the first two in a big way, and every other sin that we have, and it's pride. When I was studying and kind of thinking through, like, pride kept coming up as this big issue that God is so concerned about. And there's so many scripture about pride goes before the fall, and God is against the proud, but he walks with the humbly, and we're called to walk humbly with God in so many different ways where God is really, really against us. In fact, when you think about it, it's what got Satan kicked out of heaven. I mean, so of all the sins, and yet in our culture, we've walked so far away from God that we actually celebrate pride. I mean, it's so backwards that we want our kids to have a sense of pride. We're so worried about their ego and to hurt their sense of pride. And I think you can do that. I don't think you should damage a kid's psyche on certain things. But man, I don't think we have to worry about them walking around with damaged egos. I think it's the other way around. They're walking around with such an entitled perspective on life. And really, I've talked about this, and just this, I would love to have shared this. I'm sharing it now, but sexual sin shapes your soul. Say that 6 times fast. Money, financial sin, it shapes your trust. The reason why pride and ego is such a big deal is because it shapes your identity. And I was listening to somebody talking about this a few months ago, and they were talking about how only God can handle the weight of worship. And how when somebody worships us, and we don't think about it worshiping, when somebody gives us a compliment, when we start to think maybe it's not a somebody, maybe it's, we're getting paid to do it, a lot of money, or whatever that is, it starts to feed something in us that we don't have the capacity to handle, which is why we get inflated. It's why we act arrogant and egotistical, and all of us are susceptible to this. And yet God is worthy and able to handle worship. It's why we worship him. We are not. And yet so much of our culture is about really enhancing our own sense of pride in ourselves. And yet, as I look at Scripture, as I look at who we're called to be and what we can handle, it's one of the big ones. It's God's very clear. You're to walk humbly before me, not in arrogance, not in pride, that you will fall. And again, I've had those moments where I've got a little too big for my britches, and a little too arrogant, a little too prideful, a little bit like, oh, I'm amazing at this. And then, God finds very subtle, small ways to humble me, sometimes very publicly to humble me in front of other people. And it's exactly what I need, because it shapes my identity, and I'm not able to handle that. That I'm at my best when I understand clearly who God called me to be, how he made me, and how that is in relation to who he is. And when I'm under that, I'm in a lot better place. And so, any thoughts on that one?
No, I mean, so you said about how that one shapes the other two in a lot of ways, and so I can think right now. It a lot of times it's pride in the things we have, so we spend the money, right?
Yeah.
So
I deserve this.
Yep, absolutely.
And sexual sins, I can handle this.
Yeah.
That's exactly what some of you are saying when I talk about find somebody, confess it, like, oh, I can handle it. It's not a big deal. Like, it's pride. It's that one. You're right. Yeah. It's so, thank you for saying that. It so feeds everything else. And so, it's so true.
Easy to get caught up.
It's really easy. And so if you are struggling with that, figure out ways to walk humbly. Confession's a great way, and really admit your faults. I mean, we talk about that, just joking a lot, but it's one of the reasons why on Sunday mornings I tell a lot of what I call Nick is an idiot stories, and I do it very intentionally because it's really easy for me on a stage and we got a camera and it's easy for either me or other people to elevate me. And it's like, no, we don't need that. I don't need that. Trust me. And so I try to tell a lot of like, no, I'm a moron. Like I screw up. I burnt my lawn up. I did all these dumb things. I'm going to grow a beard and my wife's furious at me right now, which side note, if you're watching this before this Sunday, man, do I have a great intro story for you that you do not want to hear. I got a text message. It's awesome. So anyway.
Yeah. So we do want to get to some of the questions.
Yeah, we do.
We had a few come in this week. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you the first one. And we'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah.
We've got a few to get through. So, first question is: I have a pretty close relationship with God. I'm very familiar with His voice, and He speaks to me frequently. Cool. However, I also have a mind that tends toward being overactive, and sometimes I have trouble telling the difference between His usually quiet way of speaking and my own mental voice or imagination. So, how can I clearly discern God from the mental noise?
That's a great question. Man, so glad you asked that question. That is the question we're going to be answering this Sunday. So I'm gonna call a pause or a walk on it. Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think that's the tension, and it's about the filters you have set up that we're going to walk through. But please show up Sunday. We're going to hit that. And if I don't hit your exact question, ask it a different way for me, and we'll hit it next Tuesday. Just and let me know, hey, I asked this question last week. You didn't do a good job answering it, so I know.
I'll read that part next
week. That'd be great. Yeah, hey, moron, you didn't answer it right. Yeah, so.
All right, so number 2 is I work with a small, close-knit group of people from many backgrounds: Catholic, Baptist, Church of Christ, non-denominational. I feel blessed that we can all respect and share our beliefs and converse without judgment. Recently, though, I have watched someone's face struggle due to a sermon from a new pastor at our church on predetermined destiny, and I want to have a better understanding of that for myself and for her.
Me too. Yeah. That is, wow, we're 0 for 2 right now. I'm not going to answer that one either. That's a great question. Let me say this. That's a deeper question about, it's a whole Calvinism, Arminianism issue. It's predestination at the core of it. It's what was God doing before time began. So many questions. And I actually did my thesis in seminary on this topic. And so I love this topic and would love to talk to you. I'd say if you ask that question, grab me privately. Let's talk. That's not really... We may do another podcast totally on that.
That could be a whole...
It could be a whole, probably series. I mean, there's books written about that issue, and so it's not a quick 30-second answer, but it's a wonderful question, actually an important one for our faith.
Well, let's try this one.
Can you give me one that I'm going to answer? That'd be great. Yeah,
I got you.
Okay.
All right, so I'm a little confused. I have tried to live out the 10 Commandments my whole life, as well as tithe and spend Sundays, my Sabbath, with my family and not mow or do any chores. Are you saying the only tithing is in agreement, or that only the tithing is in agreement with the New Testament and God's will?
Yeah, no. So that's a great question. I can answer that one. That's based off Sunday. So I talked about finances because we're in a year-end offering series, and I talked about how the pushback with tithing is, Nick, that's Old Testament law, and I was undoing kind of the law. We're not over that. And so I use that as an example, starting in Genesis through Revelation and God and giving. But no, I would argue that all of the 10 Commandments are reinforced in the New Testament. My argument was this, that the reason that you should or should not do something has zero to do with the 10 Commandments and everything to do with how God reinterpreted them. So if you... And I didn't say this Sunday, so this is really helpful for me, even just processing it. So if you don't murder because it says don't murder,
you're doing it for the wrong reason?
Yeah, well, maybe, but you're going to fall short. Because, again, you're having a standard that Jesus came in later. If you remember the fourth question was, is there anything else about it? Is there an expansion of it? Jesus is really clear. The standard isn't don't murder. The standard is don't even say raka to your brother, which means you fool. He's like, because then you've murdered in your heart. And so my struggle with the 10 Commandments is we hold those up as the standards of, I just need to make sure I do these things. And it's like Jesus comes along and says, listen, when he says it is finished on the cross, he's talking about the law. He's talking about there's no more, you don't have to follow those. You're no longer under that authority. and for good reason. But even if you come back and go, but Nick, they're so helpful, they're so informative, I would agree with that. But yet there's been an expansion. Jesus is like, yeah, but you better take it further than the Ten Commandments. If your only guardrail and guideline are the Ten Commandments, you're going to fall really short. And you're going to end up in those ditches that we talked about Sunday morning. You're going to end up because, man, there's so much more to it than that. And my fear was, in talking about the Ten Commandments, was that we have held those up as a model for what a good Christian looks like. And yet there's a story in the New Testament where the rich young ruler, they call him, he walks up to Jesus. It deals with money, so this is perfect for a year-end offering series. He walks up to Jesus and says, hey, what do I got to do to get to heaven? And Jesus starts to quote the Ten Commandments. He's like, yeah, don't murder and honor your mother and father and don't commit adultery. And he's like, I've done them all. Mm-hmm. And which says the liar, because there's no way he did it. But anyway, we'll just assume he's right. And Jesus goes, cool. One thing you lack. Give away all of your stuff and come follow me. And it says the guy went away sad because he had a lot of money. And so my kind of pushback with the Ten Commandments a little bit has to do with that's the wrong standard to live by. Like Christ calls us to such a higher standard to follow him, not to follow a bunch of rules. That when we follow him, we're going to be in a better place anyway. Of course, we're going to do the rules. Why? Because Jesus isn't going to tell us to do those 10 things. I mean, we're going to do that. But it leads to such a richer and more diverse walk with God than just, I don't do this, I don't do this, I don't do this, I don't do this. I call them the not bad Christians. Yeah. I'm not a bad Christian. Why? Because I don't do this, I don't do this, I don't do this, I don't do this. So, I hope that's helpful. Any clarifying comments?
Yeah, it does. It almost feels like the clarification around the rules, right? Yeah. So what we're talking about from the New Testament almost feel like they get they affect a little closer to the heart than just not following a rule. Yeah. So that's the way I see it.
It's the whole transform series. Yeah. We said it week 1. Like there's a conformity which is external. There's a transformation which is internal. And it's a great way to put it, Seth. What Jesus is dealing with is I want your heart. Yeah. I want you to want to do these things. I want to change you from the inside out, not from the outside in. And that's thank you for articulating my answer in 13 seconds when it took me 5 minutes. So
I get one every now.
That's why he's here. Yeah, right there.
All right, so I got one more for you. In the culture of impatience, how can we as believers stretch our patience in being transformed? What should our new definition be? How should we not wait in vain?
Yeah. So that's like an onion. There's like layers of that question right there. I would say this: if you're struggling with patience, the first thing would be, grab this devotional that we wrote for the whole thing, and start this. And the reason why I say that is this will create patience in you, because transformation isn't a microwave, like I did it. Look, I prayed the prayer, I did the deal. Like this is a process that's going to take you several weeks. If you haven't started yet, that's okay. You can email us. We've got a digital copy that I'm actually working from. We've got hard copies. You can come. You don't have to come to our church. If you don't come to our church, just let us know. We'll get you a copy of it. We'd love to put it in your hands. It's a process, though, that you go through, and I think our patience grows. What I see from people is one of two things. Either they want it now, and they don't get it, so they quit, or they just never ask. And I think that what patience grows when we hold on to something and go, God, it's a story in the Old Testament of Jacob and God wrestling with God. And he wrestles all night. And he says, I'm not letting go until you bless me. I'm not going to let go. I love that image of just not letting go. And I think that's when patience is developed. But it's developed, not given. I think many times we ask, God, give me patience. And God's like, I'm not going to give it to you. But I'm going to create an environment where you can grow it. And when we walk with that perspective, I think that's the new definition. It's not something given, it's something grown. And I would say start with the Transform devotional, or you've got your own devotional, whatever it is, and then really hold tight. There's things I've prayed for, some of them for 2, 3, 4 years until they were answered. And I had to stand in that gap, consistently pray for them and go, God, no, I'm not letting go of this. I'm going to pray for this. I really believe you. This lines up with your will. It's inside the guardrails and guidelines. I believe it's part of my calling and my future. I'm not going to let this go. So
Yeah, I think the patience is as much as a discipline as everyday reading and praying and all those things. And so the devotional is a great way, I think, to start developing. If you don't have some of those disciplines, that helps. It's also just a great time to reflect and really just kind of get in a great headspace and really get out of that microwave culture for a few minutes a day.
It's hard. It really is. Yeah.
So that's all I got for this week questions.
Cool.
So again, if you guys have questions more from either this podcast or after this coming Sunday's message, you can go on our website, click the Transform link, and submit those completely anonymously there. A lot of great questions this week.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. So thank you so much. I hope the series is blessing you. I hope you have questions because that means you're listening. And either way, man, we will see you Sunday, hopefully.